Dan Willis.
Not to be confused with Dan Wells.
Not to be confused with the local author Dan Wells.
Yeah, this is my next book. It's called The Flux Engine. It's a YA steampunk set in the Wild West, or an alternate history Wild West. And there wasn't a lot of interest in Wild West fiction of any kind, especially not fantasy setting. And so I was thinking I was going to have to self-publish this. Fortunately, steampunk jumped the pond about 2 years ago. Cherry Priest and guy who wrote Leviathan, whose name just dribbled out of my head. They've both written steampunks that are not as strictly set in Victorian Europe. And so you get that same, the fun of steampunk to me is that you got mad scientists and ray guns and secret formulas and futuristic machines, and the Victorian romantic element to it I think was holding it back, to be real honest about it. I know a lot of people who do the costuming, they really get into that aesthetic, but I think what really the undercoring fun of steampunk is the best description I ever heard of it was, it's tomorrow's future yesterday. And that's just, it's like you're in Jules Verne's world. It's fantastic. And right now Tor has it. They have not bought it yet, but they've had it for 6 months, which means they like it, and I'm hoping they like it enough to buy it. That's what they're debating right now, because they haven't contacted me. What that means is, if there was no, that would have come back very quickly. So they like it. The question is, do they like it enough to buy it? Do they see a future in it? And does it fit into their catalog? There's all kinds of decisions these editors have to make about what actually gets bought. If it isn't picked up, I will probably be self-publishing it. It's a nice little story about an alternate history, Wild West, where the Revolutionary War took actually 50 years to fight because technology had spiked right before then with the discovery of Atlantis, and that the entire world changed. And so the Civil War didn't happen because the Revolutionary War kind of encroached into that period. And this is in what would be post-Civil War had the Civil War happened. And it's about a young boy who, the Atlantean technology is based on crystals that you grow. Maybe if any kid's ever grown a crystal, it's that kind of technology. And the crystals allow you to break the laws of physics with harmonic applications. They give off tones, which allow you to do all kinds of cool things. And this kid has a crystal that his mother gave him before she vanished, and when he holds it, he hears music, and so he believes that his mother's trying to communicate with him through the crystal, and so he's on this big lifelong quest to figure out how that works. And when he eventually figures out how to tap into the crystal and causes a massive disaster as a result, everyone starts looking to try and either kill him, capture him, or use him. So he gets picked up by Wild Bill Hickok, who's in the book, and they kind of go off trying to figure out why everyone wants this kid dead. And it's a lot of fun.
So is this a standalone book, or is it something you're looking to turn into a...
It could be serialized. I left it wide open at the end, okay. But it could also be a standalone. It depends on what kind of interest I get. I would like to write more of these. I think it's a fun universe. I've got all kinds of neat little bits to it. Somebody asked if I had vampires in my universe. I said, yeah, but they're more like hemophiliacs and lepers combined. They're called leakers, and they have a hemophiliac disease where their blood actually seeps out their skin, and they have to replenish their liquids, and their digestive system is different. It's basically in a steampunk where basically you have some mad scientist created a formula that was supposed to make humans better, and it basically changed these people into they have to literally drink blood in order to replenish their own blood supply, and because it leaks out through their skin. So they have leaker colonies, like a leper colony. And they have to live near slaughterhouses and places where they have blood supplies. They're not strong or powerful. They're weak and sickly and
they're not undead. They're just
they're just people with a really horrible disease. And the plot actually for the next book is somebody begins to take advantage of them and use them as weapons, which is kind of despicable when you think about using a sick person as a weapon.
So how are you going to find out when this gets published, or if it's published, or how it gets published?
Well, my website is dansrealm.com, which is just like it sounds. And I'll be updating that regularly with information about how this is doing. Obviously, if Tor publishes it, it'll show up in Barnes & Noble, which is the only bookstore left, and on Amazon. But and you can follow me on Twitter, WDanielWillis.
No Facebook?
I have a Facebook page. I believe that's also WDanielWillis. Okay. So, but if you go to my dansrealm.com, I have links to all that stuff. So,
you've written a number of Dragonlance books.
I've written 4, 3 for the young adult line and 1 for the regular line.
So was this a stretch for you at all, or did it just seem to
No.
fit for you?
I was writing my own fiction prior to working for Dragonlance. It's just, you talk to anybody who's been published, it's hard to get to get published. And after I beat my head on that wall for quite a while, and I was not as good a writer as I needed to be at the time, so it was justifiably so. I found out that Wizards of the Coast was putting together a Dragonlance anthology. In fact, Tracy Hickman is the guy who told me about it. And so I sent them a little story that I'd written, which they hated. But they said, we can tell you can write, we just don't like this story. Why don't you write something for this anthology? So I did. And after going back and forth 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or a dozen times, with them hating it less every iteration, they finally got to the point where they really liked what I had done, and it went in the anthology. It was the only humor piece. I'm not a humor writer. It just ended up that way. It was the only humor piece in the book, and did really well. And I got a call from Phil Athens, who was the head of Wizards publishing division at the time. And he said, you know what, we're doing this young adult thing. We think you'd be perfect for it. Would you do it? I'm like, of course not. Go ahead. It was a real eye-opening experience because they didn't want just to be in the YA space. I mean, Harry Potter, of course, was huge at the time. Still is huge, but it was really huge at the time. And they didn't just want to be in the YA space. They wanted to be in the YA space yesterday. And so they had 2 stories, sort of a part A and part B. And where you have these characters, and there's one arc, and that would end. And then the same characters would start another arc. It was 8 books, and they had 6 different authors write the 8 books. I wrote 2 of them. And so I actually wrote the 3rd book in each of the series of 4. Which is cool, because if you diagram a story into 4 parts, the 3rd part is where everybody, all the problems, the squabbles, if you think of the Avengers movie, this is where they all have to come together and work together to defeat the big bad guy in book 4. And so I got the cool part of all the stories, where the characters had to start working together, had to start being competent, had to start doing things that were heroic. It just so worked for me. I loved it. But I had to write these massive outlines and get them approved, and they say, okay, this, here's the overall story arc, and here's the piece you're going to write. How are you going to tell this story? They have to start here, and they have to end here, and everything in the middle is up to you. And I wrote book 3, and I submitted my outline before the outline for book 1 was finalized. And they approved it, and I wrote my book and had it into them before book 1 was finished. And they really liked it, so they brought me back for the 2nd series. And then I wrote the 3rd book in a trilogy that I pitched. I pitched a trilogy, not the one that actually got made. I said, I love this character I created in book 7, which I had just submitted. I mean, literally, it was within weeks of me turning in my final copy. I love this character. I want to do a trilogy with her and explain what happens to her family with this kind of mystery that I set up in the book. And they're like, oh, no, we already got a guy doing that. What? What do you mean you already got a guy doing that? Well, he'd read my outline, which I had to submit before I even started the book. And he said, oh, this is really cool. Let's take this character. And, of course, when you do work for hire, you don't own anything. And so there's nothing I can do to stop them. But they said, well, why don't you come in and write the final book in this trilogy? He's writing the 1st book, someone else is writing the 2nd, and you'll have you write the 3rd. They quit doing that after that trilogy. They started having one author write trilogies because they'd had enough books into the space that they were comfortable. But it was really interesting to write a story with other people, especially when you have, the outlines were 20 pages long. They weren't really, they should have been like 80 pages long. But there were whole plot threads. My 1st book was called The Dragon Well, and the characters in the first 2 books, there was a Minotaur who was a member of the group. No one told me that. And so everyone's like, what happened to the Minotaur? I'm like, what Minotaur? Because my book was finished before their books were done. And so, wasn't in the outline, how do I know? And there were moments like that. We're like, why did her personality change 180 degrees from this book to this book? Because just different people writing it. They had a different take on the character.
Frustrating.
It wasn't so much frustrating as well as amusing. It's probably frustrating as for a reader. Like, well, wait a minute, I thought this guy was competent in the last book. Now he's a boob, But it was very amusing for me. I had a character that in the same book, book 7 of the series, the one I wrote called the Dragon Knight. And I was another character I wanted to spin off, this gnome named Hector. And I found out, again, when I pitched the spin-off, that it was already being done. Oh, nice. I created that character. It was all me. No one had ever created that character before me. And they were doing something else with it.
That's too bad.
Yeah, it happens. It happens.
Yeah.
I'm actually kind of glad I didn't do that series because I think they got about halfway through that series before they shut down the publisher. So I don't know if that series was ever actually finished, which is kind of sad.
Is there in a situation like that, is there an opportunity for you to pick it back up? Or
no, because they own everything lock, stock, and barrel. When you do work for hire, you own nothing. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's a good way to make a living. You can make a pretty good living doing work for hire. Not with Wizards of the Coast, but if you write Star Wars books, that's a very lucrative occupation. But yeah, it's not like I'm ever going to get the rights back to those. There's no rights for me to get back. I never had them in the first place.
And Wizards of the Coast completely shut down their whole book publishing line.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Hasbro, with the parent company, got a new CEO, and I guess he looked at the books, and publishing breaks even. I mean, it's not a real big money-making venture most of the time. And it was kind of a loss leader for their game products. I mean, you had the Dragonlance, the Forgotten Realms was their big seller. And that, of course, sold D&D modules and D&D books, and encouraged people to play Dungeons & Dragons. They used it very heavily for that. And, of course, Wizards of the Coast also owns Magic the Gathering, which is a license to print money.
Yes, it is.
And so I think he looked at the balance sheet and went, why are we doing this publishing thing? It's not making us money. It's not costing us money, but it's not making us money, and we're in the business to make money. Why are we not moving forward? And they just killed it. And, I mean, I'm just surmising here. I have no actual evidence that that's what happened. But they had branched out under an editor who worked for me, or with me, Stacy Whitman. And they had branched out into buying individual properties, unique properties, where the owners retained the rights. And so they were becoming a full-on mainstream publisher. It was really very cool. And they just shut all that down.
That's too bad. As an author who's been in the industry for a while, how long have you been writing for?
I've been writing for about 7-8 years now.
Have you noticed
professionally?
Have you noticed in that time period that the term self-publish isn't as dirty of a word as it used to be?
Oh yeah. When I first got into the business, self-publishing meant you didn't have the chops to make it as a real author. In the world today, there are people who are self-publishing who are horrible authors, who are making millions of dollars, and people who are self-publishing who are brilliant authors who are getting no traction at all, and everything in between. What's interesting, I think, about that is, and the reason why this is happening, of course, is that books are now becoming electronic. And the major book companies, they don't want this to happen. They would very much like to keep books in print because they've spent millions of dollars investing in printing presses and cover presses and things that are designed to produce physical books. I mean, I don't blame them at all because they have to write that equipment off, and I bet they still have billions of dollars as a group on their books. And if books go electronic, they're not going to be able to pay for these things. And that's going to force some of them into bankruptcy. And so it's not a good thing in that respect. But I remember very vividly, I'm old enough that I was in high school in the early 80s. And I remember, I think it was about 1983, when the price of a CD player went from like $1,000 to like $300, then it was like $200, and within 6 months of that, vinyl records were gone. I mean, you hung out at the record store. It's what you did back in the 80s. You go to the mall, you hang at the record store, and 3 or 4 record stores in your average mall, and not a vinyl album in any of them. And it only took like 6 months for that to happen. It was astounding. Books, I don't think are going to take that course as much because there's something about a physical book. In fact, I'm a big fat guy. I make no apologies for that. But I read a diet book. I read it on Kindle. I have a Kindle app for my iPad, and it was very annoying because I kept wanting to refer back to certain things. I was like, well, this doctor who put this, I'm diabetic, and it's a diabetic diet. And I was being very careful. Obviously, you don't want to screw around with something like diabetes. And so I wanted to go back and reference stuff. And with the electronic book, while it's nice to be able to carry tons of books in this little tiny package, I couldn't refer to anything. That's why I have to get the physical copy of this book. There's just some things that a physical book cannot be replaced. It's for some applications, but they're really narrow. And so I think you're going to find a lot of people. I love getting my books electronically. Dave Butler, a friend of mine who's here at this convention, he has a book out, and he's given one away, and so I went and bought his first book and got the free one. I did it on Amazon. I did it in the lobby of this hotel. I didn't have to get up out of my chair, and I love that. And it was delivered right to my Kindle while I was sitting there, or my Kindle app for the iPad while I was sitting there. That power, the impulse buy power, the ability to get what you want when you want, read what you want when you want. Have a mood strike you and say, well, I want to read. I want to read some Dresden Files. Let me flip that open. you know, if you had your library at home, it's probably in a book, in a box under your bed or something, because you don't have so much shelf space. You got to relegate that. And now it's so much more powerful, and you can read what you want when you want. It's so much fun. Publishers are reacting to that. Dave Wolverton, who's a friend of mine, David Farland, if they're not familiar, he thinks that publishers are going to get this figured out, and they're going to get back on track. They're going to be back on top in a couple of years. Tracy Hickman, who you interviewed earlier today, thinks that some of these publishers might go down. There's if all the opinions in between. So it's kind of the Wild West out there. So yeah,
I appreciate the time.
That's fun. I was talking about this stuff. Thank you.